some of the greatest songs in reggae music, and you have differences, and this is how you do it. Why? I tell you.
Yeah.
Anyway, this morning, listeners, it's time to talk about the opposition leader and his contribution to the budget debate on Tuesday. And nobody watching the presentation on Tuesday could fault Mark Jefferson Golding on the energy front. He was plugged into a secure power source, and I felt he maintained a high voltage throughout. And it is noteworthy because there have been speeches from him in the past which have not been high voltage in the same platform. So for him to have started energetic and finished that way without at any time being enervated, it's a credit to him. So that's one. Two, the framework of his presentation. You can see he really put a lot of thought into the approach. And again, it's noteworthy because there have been speeches in the past where it was as if, he turned up and made a speech rather than planned the presentation. So on Tuesday, the dealing with internal matters, talking about how close the PNP came to victory. There are many things to say about what he said, but it's not necessary to critique what he says about the PNP's performance in an election situation. When people lose elections, they always see the bright side. Even though PNP didn't contest the election to win 100,000 more votes. They contested to win the election, and they didn't do that. We all know that. But him putting in context the PNP's performance was good to energize PNP supporters and to give his army of MPs with him on the opposition benches something to cheer and to give him strength, as we say in the streets in Jamaica. So I thought that was good to start with, talking about unity in the party and, certain radio station. There's hardly a PNP set piece speech without a mention of Nationwide these days. And we all know who they were talking about, that's fine. Saying that it's unified and everything, putting on a united front. And the framework extended from that to the situation facing the country. He said the triple threat of Melissa, global oil prices, and just, conditions attendant to growing an economy. He looked at prescriptions. Some he went deep into. He used visual props, and he tried. It was a speech that caused our news to go late. And it's the opposition leader, so you don't cut the opposition leader's presentation for your newscast, even though your newscast is sponsored and there are people who want their obligations and their entitlement. Has to wait because it's the opposition leader. And his presentation must be heard and heard in full. I don't know who came up with the phrase, the devil is in the details. I need to research that later. But there's always devilry in the details. I would say that Mr. Golding's point about gas being more expensive than water, maybe it would have gone down better if it was meant as a joke, because I can't see how water, which is available everywhere to most people, accessible to most people, you turn on your tap, you get water. Bottled water is a luxury. Bottled water is something you choose to buy because I've never heard anybody say the NWC's water is not fit for consumption. Yeah? So to compare 2 bottles of water to a liter of gas and say water is more expensive than gas, I struggle to see the sense in the point. So with that visual prop, Mr. Golding bled some points on that because I thought that was not the point to make, because it was a rather silly point and not in keeping with Golding's cerebral abilities. Beyond that, when you looked at the content of what he said, much of what he said was adumbrated in the PNP's Jamaica Love Manifesto, which they sought to win office with in 2025. And being so close to the election was only September last year. Now, the campaign climaxed on September 3 with the election results. So you can't criticize him for bringing themes and approaches outlined in that manifesto to the budget presentation at this time, because these things are still fresh. And what he's effectively saying is that this is what we wanted to win office with. Now that he's out of office, well, now that he didn't win office, he's saying, well, these prescriptions would still be better than what the government is implementing at this time. You can look at that how you may. I'm not criticizing that carte blanche. I'm just putting in context that for those who will criticize it for that, look at the proximity between now and the election campaign passed, and then look at what he was saying that he would do for Jamaica. He brought that back in the budget debate, and I think that was a smart thing to do in context. I say in context because I don't understand some of the details presented from the perspective of, you said multiple times in the speech that the country had shed 50% of GDP based on the damage caused by Melissa. And yet your prescriptions were almost business as usual. Remember, when you crafted that Jamaica Love Manifesto, there wasn't the fallout from a Melissa to contend with. And by lifting much of Jamaica Love into the budget presentation, it was as if Melissa never happened, even though you say Melissa caused damage. So the speaking one way and the reality being the other way, it didn't connect for me. And I think that a chance was missed to adapt some of what was promised to the country, set out to the country in the election campaign, for the realities of now to make that connection. There were times in the speech where Mr. Golding grabbed my attention and then he failed to tie up the point. For instance, remittances. He positioned remittances argument as if the PNP had an alternative to our historic dependence on remittance. But then he didn't tie up the point at all. In fact, the last sentence under the remittance heading, I was wondering what I was reading, because it was just totally different from the build-up to the argument. Because again, everything he said did suggest that he was warning us about an over-reliance on remittance, and that under his plan, under a PNP administration, there would be a credible alternative. He said that, remittances, there are medium to long-term risks. Of course, there's always been, as long as there are remittances, there will always be medium to long-term risks to remittances coming from abroad. That's a fact. So it's like saying the sky is blue sometimes, and like if you look up, you will see the sky. It's obvious. So I wasn't expecting the bleeding obvious from him on the point. Expecting him, based on how he positioned the point, to then offer an alternative to this dependence on remittances. It never came. National security. I think that the remittances point, the national security point, were points that he put in just to hedge against criticism that he didn't include these things in his speech. Because his approach to national security, sustainable national security, was to call for body-worn cameras, which have already been deployed. The JCF issued a statement several weeks ago talking about taking delivery of 1,000 body cameras and deploying them. And anybody who drives around Jamaica can hold up their hand and say, miss, I saw a policeman. I've seen a policeman, at least one with a body-worn camera. I've seen a policeman with a body-worn camera. They are being deployed. So I don't know how Mr. Golding's call for, or his contribution to the national security situation is to call for something that is in implementation. It shows a disconnect, and it didn't reflect well. On the issue of roads, he said, look, under a PNP administration, each division gets 15 million to do localized road work administered by the local authority. I thought that was a plus point. And he says an additional 5 million will be provided given the availability of resources and given the need. So that was something that is different from what is happening now, and which marks, okay, so under a PNP administration, at least these resources will be made available to the local authorities, who always talk about not having direct control of the resources themselves to do the work that is necessary. 15 million in a division, I mean, would you give the Waterloo division in Northeast in Andrew the same 15 million as you would give one of the divisions in Southeast Clarendon or somewhere where the road them never get a lick of marl in their life? I don't know. So, but that's what he said. He said give each 15 million. So I'm taking him at his word. Then you're going to have the argument of allocation based on need. But, that's a later consideration. But at least that's on the table. I gave that as a plus point. On the issue of workers' rights, this is where I felt let down yesterday, significantly by Mr. Golding. We all know the PNP's relationship with Cuba. And we all know that party's staunch support for Cuban regimes over time, and the Cuban people in general, and with good reason. The Cubans have been very good to us. But as was revealed here in that document from
Cuba Archive.
Cuba Archive. Yeah? Thank you, Tona. The Cubans were working under conditions of servitude, which is why I said to myself, how could Mr. Golding, in his budget contribution, speak about workers' rights with the passion he did, while ignoring that the Cuban arrangement, which he criticized the government for ending unilaterally. Here's what Golding said about our workers. He said, the abuse of contract worker arrangements has become a matter of national shame. Workers in some industries are employed for years, sometimes decades, on repeating short-term contracts that deny them the benefits and protections afforded to permanent employees. This undermines the family's long-term security and weakens social cohesion in our society. It must end. You seem happy to leave things as they are. He was talking to the Prime Minister, the government. We would not do so. We would ensure that genuine workers receive genuine rights regardless of the legal form of their contracts. We would be passing comprehensive legislation to eliminate these abusive contractual arrangements. That is building back better than before. Jamaica needs to promote productivity as a cornerstone of a strong economy. If you work extra hard, you should keep what you earn. What are you doing to incentivize greater national productivity? So why is it that Jamaicans who work hard must keep what they earn, but the Cubans who work under the Cuban medical program must have their wages sent to the Cuban government? And you are satisfied with that? And remember, since those revelations from Cuba Archive, not a single soul has said that it is a wrong conclusion that the Cuban workers have had their pay taken, all of it, and sent back to their government. Even the government here, the Wellness Administration, has admitted that that's what they found in the contracts. So I'm saying this morning, I understand the PNP's historic relationship with Cuba. And I understand that the party must speak in support of Cuba. Perhaps it is part of the doctrine that no matter what, PNP must support Cuba. All right, fine. But how could you hug up that arrangement which had the Cuban people working here in servitude, modern day slavery, and then at the same time you twist your tongue and say that the Jamaican government must do right by workers' rights because workers have a right to keep all of what they earn? You let me down there. Beyond that, sustainment, the Clean Slate program. Golding said thousands of Jamaicans are trapped in a cycle of debt that prevents them from moving forward. They owe property taxes, traffic tickets, water bills, and student loans. Interest and penalties have often grown larger than the original debt. They cannot see a way out. We should offer them the chance for a clean slate by forgiving the interest and the charges, the penalties. How? Free money again? I mean, how many thousand Jamaicans would you do this for? This is something that you should have nailed out to give the details on, because you're promising Jamaicans a clean slate. I mean, time does not allow. Jermaine is playing his theme music already. But there are so many little things that he started that grabbed you. And then as you're waiting for the details to come, and it never came. So I gave him a plus for energy. Yeah, and he maintained that. And there were aspects of it that were positive. What they're doing for older people and the comprehensive national health service, that's commendable. For roads, that's commendable. But there are so many things that left us wanting more and left us wanting a man of Golding's caliber to just nail down the point. And he never have no nail yesterday in many aspects of the presentation.